In a time of uncertainty, the world's power shifting from side to side, there is one country that you can't deny its existence and its battle for survival, surrounded by its enemies around. Israel is today fighting the fight for freedom, for liberty, and for world peace. To know the truth when it matters the most, reports, public opinion, and more, visit our blog at bibreport.blogspot.com or on Twitter at Bibi Report. Or listen to our extended radio show every Monday night at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time with a panel of experts and analysts on Blog Talk Radio.
The current crisis in the Middle East, peace talks over Israeli settlement construction freeze is coming to a head. The 60-day freeze extension has the Israeli public divided in opinion polls just published this weekend. And Prime Minister Netanyahu is, as we are seeing, experiencing tremendous pressure from all sides to accept that offer. Netanyahu knows if he rejects the deal, he'll anger President Obama, and President Obama, as we are seeing, isn't likely to turn on Netanyahu before the U.S. Midterm elections. But he will certainly increase pressure after the elections, especially if the Democrats maintain their majority. First, why has the Obama administration chosen to focus its diplomacy on extracting a purely symbolic but next to impossible concession from Netanyahu? And how can we assure by voting in this election that this scenario of an increase in the pressure over settlements won't become true?
You know, it's hard to explain exactly why the Obama administration has gone in this direction, but to take a step back and put this in a larger context, you know, I think it is very unfortunate that it's taken this pathway, but it's consistent with what has happened with other close allies. Think for example, about how the administration treated our friends in Poland and the Czech Republic with their decision to move forward on a missile defense system, and then ultimately the Obama administration backed off. Here the Poles and Czechs took on basically the wrath of the Russians, and it was all for naught. Similarly, you know, during the events not long ago in Honduras, when Hondurans were acting pursuant to their constitution, they were told by the administration, no, this is a coup, and they were, you know, basically chastised by the administration, and it was deeply unfortunate. Ultimately, over a course of months, things got settled out, and it's returned to normalcy. And then turning to Israel, so you almost say, you know, being a close friend of the United States, like Honduras, like Israel, like Poland or the Czech Republic, is becoming an increasingly dangerous game in some ways. And I just think that's disappointing, and in my view, it doesn't serve the American foreign policy interest ultimately. So I think moving forward, the tier one issue that most folks are thinking about as it relates to this election is all economy, jobs, and spending. But to your point, that there is a foreign policy agenda that, while it's not as public in terms of the general conversation, the consequences of this election are just as important. And historically, Israel has enjoyed an incredibly strong relationship in the House of Representatives. And I think it's for those people that continue to want to stand for, you know, a strong Israel living at peace with its neighbors in a difficult area of the world, they know that Israel needs to be assured of its strong relationship with the United States. And so I think Congress has a role to play in that, in keeping the administration accountable on some of these issues.
Chuck DeVore claimed in an interview on Fox News that the U.S. Senate has a bigger role in foreign policy than the Congress. Currently, we're seeing the Republicans leading in the congressional ballot, but it's still divided on the Senate. Therefore, what changes can we expect if the Republicans only win the House in November regarding Israel?
I agree with the assessment that the United States Senate has a bigger foreign policy role. That's built right into the Constitution with the advice and consent language, and it's very, very significant. So the Senate Foreign Relations Committee has, from a foreign policy point of view, is clearly the most important committee on Capitol Hill. Now, that being said, there's clearly a funding role that the House of Representatives plays, and Israel and strong support for Israel has to enjoy support in both chambers. But without question, the U.S. Senate has a bigger influence. I keep going back to this race involving Mark Kirk, my House colleague who's running for the U.S. Senate from Illinois. And Mark has, in my view, Israel historically has had no better friend in the House of Representatives than Mark Kirk, and he's been incredibly active and deliberate and intentional about building a strong U.S.-Israeli relationship for the benefit of both countries. And Mark is also one of those people that can be a bulwark against a very aggressive lame duck agenda if it turns out that there is an aggressive lame duck agenda. He would be one of those senators that peels back from the supermajorities that the Democrats are going for. So do these elections matter? Yeah. I mean, it's really difficult, in my view, to overstate the importance of the consequences of these elections that are just around the corner.
Right. Peter, I have a question for you. In a McLaughlin poll published by the Emergency Committee for Israel, 46.7% of U.S. voters say to Obama's Mideast policy that it's harming Israeli security, and 47% of Muslim outreach has decreased U.S. security. What will a GOP-ruled Congress do to strengthen the U.S. role in the world, but also safeguard the national security interests of our ally Israel?
I think there's a couple things. One is a direct challenge to the idea of creating ambiguity around the status of enemy combatants. I represent part of Illinois, and Illinois was, President Obama and our governor, Pat Quinn, had a wonderful plan for Guantanamo Bay's prisoners, and that was to place them in northwestern Illinois in a security facility there. In my opinion, that was plain foolish. There was not a good plan. It would have created just a great deal of vulnerability, in my view. Some people didn't want to hear that. They said, oh, you're overstating this. I don't think it's an overstatement. I think that creates a great deal of ambiguity. You would see House Republicans say absolutely not for that sort of nonsense. And, the push would be, don't try these people as civilians. They're enemy combatants. Keep them at Guantanamo Bay. The next thing is to focus in on a robust missile defense system. And, there's initiatives that the U.S. and Israel are involved in collaboratively as it relates to missile defense. And that type of technology would continue to be held up and funded, and those types of programs would be pushed. Then finally, I think you would find among House Republicans, were we to be in the majority, an appetite that would push to hold the administration accountable as it relates to Iran sanctions. There's waivers that are built into the Iran sanctions bill, as you know, and I think that human nature is such that people want to use as much flexibility as possible. I think a House Republican majority would be a restraining influence on those in the administration that would argue that they need to waive certain components on the sanctions bill. I think that's really where the action would be. Those would be the flashpoints and ways that House Republicans, I think, can continue to drive that sort of common sense national security theme that deeply resonates with most Americans.
As a deputy whip and a member of the Ways and Means Committee and also a co-chair of the Republican Israel caucus, do you see your current leadership role being expanded within a GOP-controlled House?
You never know. My feeling is do your best in the tasks that are before you, and if your colleagues grow to entrust more responsibility, terrific. If not, what a great privilege it is to serve in the House of Representatives. I succeeded a great man in office, and that was my predecessor, Henry Hyde. And, what I observed, not only as a member of Congressman Hyde's staff, but also serving as an elected representative in the legislature within his congressional district, I observed a great man who earned the right to be heard over a period of time. Henry Hyde just didn't kind of snap into Washington and expect everybody to listen to him. He ultimately was well-studied and articulate, understood the issues, knew what he was talking about, picked his battles, and as a result, over a period of time, he was able to have a tremendous amount of influence and was widely respected on both sides of the aisle. That's a great role model, I think, for anybody serving in Congress.
And as a member of the Republican Israel caucus and your relationship with House Minority Whip Eric Cantor and the Republican Jewish Coalition, what are current projects you're involved right now at this time in your position?
Well, the first thing, this is maybe a year ago or so, I forget exactly when, but Eric Cantor asked if I would consider being a new co-chairman of the House Republican Israel caucus. And I said, yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. How big is the caucus? And as I learned, it was a fairly dormant group, kind of just a letterhead kind of group. So it was, I just set about the task of reaching out and beginning to recruit members. And now I'm pleased to say we have about 70 members of the caucus, if not a little bit more, and just trying to raise that awareness to as issues come together, asking folks if they're willing to sign letters, leading trips to Israel. My wife and I led a group of members of Congress, some of whom had never been over to Israel before. And as you know, seeing is believing, and we went over right after the 4th of July, had a tremendously insightful trip, met with leadership and so forth. And you come back from that experience of having led a trip, and it is, you can just sense that there's good things that are happening. So there's no shortage of ways to, I think, be helpful. Many of them are kind of on a case-by-case basis and largely raising awareness. I did helped put together a day-long, meeting and so forth with the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Sandy Levin, talking about the U.S.-Israeli Free Trade Agreement. Not an area that often gets a lot of conversation, but it's been a successful relationship over the years, and it is about free trade and clearly within the jurisdiction of the Ways and Means Committee. And I will say that Chairman Levin and I don't agree on too many issues, but you know what? We agreed on this one. So that's what the House Republican Israel Caucus is trying to do.
Right. Peter, you're very familiar with the Jerusalem Embassy Relocation Act that was passed in October of 1995. For listeners that are not familiar with that, the Jerusalem Embassy Act of 95 has several key provisions, and part of those provisions note that every country designate its own capital, and that Israel has so designated Jerusalem the spiritual center of Judaism. And it states that since the reunification of Jerusalem in 1967, religious freedom has been guaranteed to all. And it recalls several previous congressional resolutions calling for the city to remain united. What are you able to do to support the move of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem? We know that various measures have been put in place, but to this day and time it has not happened. And with the current administration of Obama and his plans on Jerusalem, perhaps trying to divide Jerusalem, what measures are you and your colleagues able to take to ensure that Jerusalem does remain the undivided, eternal capital of Israel?
I think it's fairly limited, actually. I mean, it's largely an executive authority, with administrations having that authority under the Constitution to make those foreign policy decisions. So, in the great scheme of things, I think it's sort of has gotten less attention than it merits because of other great challenges that are before, before the relationship right now. But it really does come down to the commitment of an administration in deciding where they're going to place an embassy and what are the circumstances.